right. Thank you very much, Macarena. Really appreciate it. Welcome, 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 everyone. Really glad that you could be here with us on today's webinar. On behalf of our Managing Director, Mr. Hector Negron, I just want to say a big welcome to you. We know that you could have spent your time elsewhere, but you chose to be with us, and we recognize that and we appreciate that. And as usual, we're going to say, listen, as far as I'm concerned with my webinars, we have fun. And it's my role to ensure that what is presented, it's fully understood on your side. So I'm gonna put it in a manner that I'm sure you'll have fun and enjoy. So I'm gonna now just start sharing my screen, and I just want you if I could just get a quick acknowledgement that you're able to see the screen. So if I could just get a quick acknowledgement, just to know that you're able to see. Are you able to send? If I could just get a quick acknowledgement, anyone, you could either just say yes, or you can just indicate in the chat. All right, beautiful. All right, so Robert says you can see, so I'm just going to make the assumption that you all can hear and you all can see. So we're going to dive a little deeper today in the Jet Analytics tool. I'm just going to take no more than about a minute or so just to recap. And you may remember that we had said that Jet Analytics is more a tool to help you present your data. Sorry, let me just close this. Present your data in the form of business analytics. You're able to present and position your data not only within the context of your organization, but also as long as you can connect to some ODBC compliant database or some other SQL related database, then you can actually incorporate that data into your project. And you're therefore able to position your data or your analysis not only within the context of the company, but maybe also within the industry, if you had industry related data. And further, if you even had data from other external sources, so that you can actually do comparisons between your data and other external. So we went through all of that, and we said that this tool is able to do this as long as you're able to bring your data into the system. Just 2 slides we're just going to look again at, and where we said, listen, at the end of the day, what you want to do is to bring in what is called raw data, as depicted by this first image, this first insert within this image. So you're connecting to all these various databases, and then through the process of what is called extraction, transformation, and loading, ETL. So we're now using a lot more familiar concepts within the world of data warehousing and business analytics. You're now able to create data marts. A data mart is really a subset of data from your overall data warehouse, where the data mart is specific data around a particular area of study or evaluation. So for instance, you might be bringing just financial data, or maybe data on sales or production, etc. And once you're able to bring your data into your data warehouse and then further into a data mart, you're able now to optimize your data by creating cubes. So again, you may, for those of you who might remember the days of the Rubik's Cube, where you're able to twist and twirl this cube and thereby analyze your data. So we know the adage, data half empty versus half full. So if you're able to see your data from different perspectives, you may get a different story. So for instance, you might have sales data, but instead of just having sales data by itself, what if you were to analyze the sales data by way of salespersons? Or you might be able to analyze the sales data by way of the region of sales. Or you might be able to analyze your sales data by way of your product group. So it's the same sales data, but because you're able to look at the data from different perspectives, we're now introducing another terminology in business analytics, which is called dimensions. So a dimension allows you to see data from a particular perspective, thereby you being able to conduct your analysis. We then said that with the tool, the JET analytics tool has various components to it. And in looking at this diagram, you're able to interpret from this diagram the following. One, if you look towards the left, you'll notice that you have the JET Data Manager. So the JET Data Manager, this icon, this represents the base tool used by the JET Analytics solution. And the purpose of the JET Data Manager is to incorporate data from all the various data sources, whether if it's D365 Business Central, D365 GP, whether it's Adapter or MySQL or any database which is ODBC compliant. It can even be a simple text file or even an Excel spreadsheet. That data can also be incorporated. So it is the JET Data Manager that allows you now to bring all this data in. And once you bring the JET Data Manager to integrate this data or to bring in this data, you now move your data into what is called a JET staging database. So that's identified by this database icon here that you see in the middle of the screen. So to move from the JET Data Manager to the staging database, this is where you perform some measure of your extraction and your transformation of data. Always remember this terminology, ETL, extraction, transformation, and loading. So you're going to be extracting your data, and you're expecting that as you extract your data from your various data sources, you'll be doing some form of transformation. One very important transformation exercise, for example, is to do some amount of data cleansing. It's very possible that you might have data that might be extreme or what is called an outlier, if we're going to be more statistical in reference. Your transformation might also include you modifying the formats of dates. I remember in one of the examples I gave where I said in the American format, we are accustomed to a date being in month first, then day, then year. But across England and in other European nations, it's actually the day first and then the month and the year. So you wouldn't want to be bringing in all this data from various data sources where you may find the dates, for example, being in different formats. So therefore, what does 1/2/2022 mean? Does that mean February, the 1st of February 2022, or does it mean the 2nd of January 2022? So these are some of the issues that you have to deal with. And you do this at the stage of the JET Data Manager, bringing your data to the JET database. So this is where we're going to complete today's session. Today's session will be looking more at some of the options that are available to you when you're bringing in the data. So I'm going to move across. Again, as part of our recap in our last session, we were able to open the JET Data Manager. And the JET Data Manager opens by default to what is called a Solution Explorer. Again, and as another recap, the team from JET they already created some standard projects for some standard applications. And what are these standard applications? D365 Business Central, or Dynamics GP, or Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. So you, in using this tool, if you have any of these three environments or these solutions already installed within your environments, then you don't have to build a project from scratch. You can actually go to the Cube store. So if I were to go to File, as you see here, and then click Cube Store, what I would get when I select the Cube Store would be a link directly to the Jet website, where based on my license, I'm able to look at the various projects which have been developed that I can use. So my license would allow me to download these projects, and in downloading these projects, I know I'm able to use them in my environment. All I would need now to do is to connect these projects to my internal database. So the question now is this: if we should download a project, are we able to do any modifications to the project? And the answer is yes, because you'll be given a standard project, right, with all the various business intelligence, the reports, the cubes, the dimensions, etc., that have been developed for you. But you can actually make changes to the project. You can either modify existing calculations, etc. So let us say if Jet created a formula that calculated stock rate of turnover or whatever, which yes is a pretty standard calculation format. But if maybe in your environment, for whatever reason, you need to make certain changes more to suit you, then you're free to do that. You're also free to create additional reports, tables, etc., which I'll actually demonstrate today and show to you. So here we're looking at, Solution Explorer, a standard project. Now I'm using GP, Dynamics GP, but it's the same approach for any of the other applications, meaning D365, Business Central, etc. So as I had indicated in the PowerPoint presentation, that we'll be looking at the staging database. The staging database is actually managed within what is called the business unit. And again, let me just quickly, for reference, come back to our PowerPoint slide. You may remember I said in today's session, we're going to be concluding this area, which is how to use the Jet Data Manager to integrate all of these various data sources and to bring them into what is called a staging database. So we're just going to ask you just to remember these terms as we move on. So going back to our virtual environment, good. If I now open the business unit, I'm just doing this by double clicking. So my Solution Explorer, in double clicking the business unit, now opens the business unit window. And what am I seeing in the business unit window? I'm seeing two particular nodes. One node which is called data source, and the other node which contains the real business unit, which is for my staging database, which has been named JetGP Stage by the developers of this project, meaning the team from Jet. So in opening my data sources node, we can see that there's already two subnodes that were created for this project, which connect to, in this case, a GP database. For you, if you're using Business Central, it would have the connection or the nodes already for the Business Central or the Axaptor, which is the 365 for finance and operations. So if you want to connect a data source, as I showed in my last presentation, if I right-click the GP and I select, this is called a context-sensitive help menu, and I select the Edit Dynamics GP Adapter, this is where I go to modify the connection settings. So when I downloaded the project, this pre-done project from the JET team would not have the connection to my own internal database. So I would have had to go inside the Edit Dynamics GP Adapter, left click, and here I'm seeing the JET Data Manager Server interface. So just as I'm doing here, or I've done in my environment, that is what you would have to do in your environment, in that you would have to identify all your connection strings, the necessary information to connect to your database. Whether if you're going to connect using a Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication, or if you're using Active Directory, etc. So this is probably just a little bit technical. It's more like for your IT guys, but the concept is there. They would know how to do the various connections. And after you connect to your data source, if you were to click the drop down for the database, you'd see the databases within your organization. So here's a listing now of the databases in my local environment, and I would now have to identify the specific database that I would like to use in my project. Within my project, the name of the database is 2. And once you have entered all the information to connect to your database, then you now go into test connection. And in testing the connection, I can see that my data would have been fine. So again, let me just say, remember, even though I'm demonstrating this within the GP environment, it's actually the same thing with all your environments, whether if it's GP or 365 Business Central. So once you have made your connection, the next thing that you have to do, if I right-click the database connectivity, you'll notice in my context-sensitive help that there's an option here which says synchronize data source. So what does a synchronized data source do? The synchronized data source is actually the command which now causes your project to link with your data and to pull data into your project. And this is important for the following reasons. I have had the question many times put to me, and it's like this. Okay, Steve, if we are able to connect to our underlying 365 Business Central database and or GP database or whatever, are you saying to me that we're able to write to the database? Because you'd be expecting that you'd be wondering if the system allows for what is called Crud Operations. That's another acronym, CRUD, Crud, which simply means create, read, update, and delete. So the answer is no. This project or the JET Analytics does not allow you to write to the underlying database. You can only read from the database. Another thing we should also note is that when you install this application, it creates its own database on your server. So your database is not always interacting with your production database, and therefore you won't find issues of like latency or issues on your network where your database is, is in for your GP or your Business Central, it's running slowly, etc. You won't find any significance there. So the synchronized data source, what it does, it therefore allows us to connect to the underlying database. And then from the synchronizing, you are able to select the tables and the fields. So this is already done. And through this synchronizing data source, the result would have been this pane, a third pane on the right-hand side called data selection. So let's go back. You remember when we said, when we mentioned the acronym ETL, extraction, transformation, loading, we had said that as you are connecting to your various data sources, one of the things you want to do is to ensure you only bring over data that is necessary or relevant to your project. And also you might want to do some measure of data cleansing. So what we're seeing here is that now that I've established my connection to my GP data source, my data selection window on the right-hand side gives me a list of all the possible tables in my underlying data source that I can connect to. Now, these tables would have already been pre-selected for you by the team from JET because the project that they created for you would have been using the standard Dynamics GP tables or your Dynamics Nav or your Business Central tables. So you can actually select any additional customized tables that you probably created within your database, maybe because of your own customizations and things which have happened within your organization. But there's something else I want you to notice. Even though we're looking here at the list of the selected tables, if I were to expand one of the nodes, you will notice, like for instance, in this particular table, that we only have the fields which you are selecting that you need to bring into your project. Good. So this is the first level in your ETL, your extraction, transformation, and loading, in that you are only selecting not only the tables that you need, but you're actually going a step further in that for the tables which you need, you can even go further and only select the relevant fields, those fields which are relevant for your project. Good. Now, if I should highlight this particular table, and if I should go back to my data source and identify the table IV00102, here it is. So if I should expand the node, you will notice that you will only see the fields that have been selected under the data selection panel. So here it is, for example, like item number, there's item number here, location code, here it is location code. So if I were to remove a selection, well, I'm not able to remove it because it says that, listen, this thing is used further down in the project, but I figure you'd get the idea of what I'm saying. So therefore, I'm only bringing into my project those fields which are needed. Now, once I bring in my selected tables and fields, what JET does is JET now begins to build my staging database. And I'm going to pause for a minute and just go back to the PowerPoint slide just to show this to you again. You may remember we said that through the JET Data Manager, After you connect to your various data sources, JET then brings the data based on the tables and the fields that you would have selected from your data sources into what is called the staging database. So as represented in this diagram, the JET staging database, I'm going to go back to our project. And here, as listed by the name or as identified by the name JET GP stage, this is now the staging database. And the staging database also has a list of the tables. These are the tables that would have been selected from our data sources. So if we go again, from our data, from the data selection panel, where you select the respective tables and fields, that data is brought across into our data sources. And then from the data source, it is imported into the staging database. So our staging database, therefore, has a copy of all the data, the tables and the fields and the respective data that were selected from our underlying database, thereby underscoring our earlier point where we said that JET does not write to your underlying data sources or your databases, but it actually pulls the data. It pulls the data based on the fields and the tables that would have been selected and writes the data into its own database called a staging database. Good? So this is how we can say emphatically that the data is not written to your database, but actually written to JET's database. And JET's database in this point is called the JET GP stage. And what I will do to also show that, I will probably load SQL Server Management Studio. See if I can just load it quickly so that we can close on this before we go to the next level. Okay, so if you'll notice, here I am. For those who are familiar with SQL, the SQL Server Management Studio is a tool that you use to manage your databases. You may remember that I said that my underlying database, this is where I had all my GP data, was in this database called TWO. But after I have created my staging database and created my connections to my data source, the JET will read the data inside the TWO database and write it to its own database here. As you can see here, the JET GP staging database. So this is where now my selected data from my underlying database will now reside in a separate database called JET GP stage. So if we move on, so I hope that that part is clear. If we move on, let us go a bit further and do some analysis on our staging database. Our staging database also has its own set of tables. But if we scroll through the list of tables, the first thing that we should probably notice is that the tables seem to have different types of icons beside it. For example, you'll see an icon with a yellow grid and a clock. You'll also see another series of tables which have a purplish color. And we also see another set of tables which are colorless, just black and white. So the question is, what are these three types of tables? Well, let's first look at the tables represented by the grid in black and white. The tables represented by a grid in black and white, these are the tables which are coming from our data source. Remember when we spoke about the data sources earlier? So for instance, GL00100, which was a table from our data source, if we should go up to the staging database, we'll notice GL00100. Here it is, right here. Good. So this now is the table that's coming from the data source. So once you see within your staging database list of tables, the list of tables which are in black and white, then these are tables which are coming directly from your data source. So what then is a table represented by yellow? If I should right click the tables node, good, you'll notice here that my context sensitive help gives me three options where I can add a custom table, add what is called a hierarchy table, or add a date table. So we're seeing here that those in purple are tables which are custom. So in other words, you made those tables. So these tables which are in purple are tables which are not coming from our underlying data source, but actually coming from your customized development within the project itself. But there's another table, which we said here, which is a date table, which has the yellowish color with the clock. Now, interestingly, you may ask, why then is there the option for a date table? And the answer is this. If you look at most financial analysis, these analyses tend to be what is called temporal in basis, temporal. Temporal, therefore, meaning it's time-based. So for you to analyze data, you tend to analyze data over a series of time where maybe you might want to analyze it yearly, year-by-year comparisons, or you might want to look at 6 months comparisons or quarterly comparisons, because static data usually gives you one type of analysis, but there is also analysis which is temporal, in that you're able to look at it over a series, over a time series. And by looking at the data over a time series, then you're able to look at, for example, trends. Good. So dates are very important. Dates are very important when you're looking at business analytics. And as such, most of these analytical tools, these business intelligence rather, most of these analytical tools tend to come with a feature that allows you to create dates. So a date table has been created called date. And if you should open the node, you'll see now a lot of the values, or a lot of the fields rather, which allow you to look at the display date, the day of the month, the day name. So let's right click the date table. And if I should go to preview table as one of my context sensitive help menu items, I'm able to see that based on these date values, how will it be displayed when used in my business intelligence? What day of the month are these dates? What is the particular day, whether it falls on a Saturday or Sunday? The day of the week, is this a weekday? So in other words, 0 meaning no, but 1 meaning yes, that it's a weekday. And what day of the quarter is this? what day of the week. So you see, there's so many options available to you for you to conduct your analysis. So you are able to create your own dates. So how do I do this? Let's create a new date table. Good. So if I right click my tables, and in my context sensitive, I'm seeing add date table. So I can now click and select. So it will ask me to give the name of my date table. No, and because I'm familiar with one of the names participants in this training, I will say, let's call this the Normandy date. Good. So we are now going to create a date table with a series of dates. And the information that you will provide after you select OK, it will create the dates. So for instance, I might say, okay, for my table, which I will call the Normandy date, I will say that my start date begins on the 1st of January, maybe 2022. And I might want dates for maybe over a 2-year period. So I'm able to select and say that I need it till maybe December 31st, 2023. Good. So I've now said that I'm going to be creating a table with dates spanning these 2 date ranges. And maybe for my format, I would want it in month first, day, then year, so I can select. Good. I can also determine what my separator is, whether I will use a dash or a slash, a forward slash. So I will use a forward slash. And you'll notice that as I'm creating the format, the dates itself actually begin to mimic the formats that I've chosen. And for me, we can select here whether the first day of the week begins on a Monday, a Sunday, or a Saturday. I might choose, I want the dates to begin on a Monday. Good. And you're also able to determine whether, for example, if your date begins on a calendar year or is it staggered. The difference of the two is that by you choosing staggered, you can actually choose when the first month actually begins. So anyway, there's nothing else that I need to put here. So I can now just select OK. And in selecting OK, you might say, okay, so where are those dates? If I should scroll down to the end of this node, I will see here that it has created a table. And that table, it has now called the Normandy date, but it's in red. So the question is, why is it in red? Anytime you see a node that is red, the color red signifies that this object, whether if it's a dimension or a table or a field, the color red denotes or it signifies that this table or object was either recently added or it was recently edited by way of its structure. And because it has been added or edited, it needs to be compiled. So the next session we'll be looking at, the webinar will be looking at how do you compile your objects into your project. So it therefore means that if I now do my business intelligence, I will not have this data available to me because it is not yet compiled. I could even right click, and if I say, okay, preview data, it is now giving me an error because it says that it has not been deployed as yet. So I have no data. So if I should right click the Normandy date, good, and I'm seeing here 2 options open to me, deploy and execute. For now, I'm just going to choose deploy and execute. In the next session, I will go in much further details as to what the deploy and execute actually does. But suffice to say, what I'm actually doing here now is making this table that I created, this table with dates, which I call the Normandy date. I'm now making it available to be used within the project. So the routine that I'm running has now done a deploy and execute. So you'll notice now that the particular table here, the Normandy date, is no longer in red. So this table of dates, if I were to right click to bring up the context sensitive and then go to preview table, you will now see that here now are all my dates, right? With the various fields, the display date, the day of the month, etc., based on the questions that I would have answered at the time when I created this table. So this table is now usable by me when I'm creating my cubes and going further into my business analytics, etc. So therefore, I'm able to use this table with the dates as a dimension. So therefore, I'm able to analyze my data from some perspective. And the perspective in this case would be date. But I'm now using this table. In using this table, I'm now able to analyze my data maybe based on year, based on quarters, etc. Good. And as you can see here, that it has the yellow icon beside it, which means that this is a date-related table. So there are some tables, as we said here, that are listed in purple. And these would be what is called customized tables. So these are tables that are not found in your underlying database, whether, as we said, the GP or the Business Central, etc. But in you building your project, you're going to find that at times you need to create custom data, because it's very possible that you might have data that you want included in your project, but that data might not be available in your underlying database. So the question therefore is, how can you bring in this data, with this custom data, as a part of your project? And you do this by way of what is called custom tables. So if I should right click my tables, right, we already worked on how to add a date table. Now we're going to look at how to create a custom table. Good. So when I left click and select custom table, it now asks me to give the name of the customs table. And I will call my table, let's call it the Otis table. Again, I'm just using the name of persons who I'm very familiar with, who I know are in this session. Good. And I've now created a table, which I now call the Otis table. And if I should scroll to the bottom, here is my table. So this is now my custom table, because it has the purple grid to the left, the icons. Good. But every table needs a set of fields. Good. So how do I add fields to the table, to my custom table? I now right click. Good. And in right clicking, you'll notice where I have in my context sensitive a menu option which says add a custom field. Good. So if I left click and say add a custom field, I'm now able to give the name. So maybe I would say maybe number. Good. And when you type, or when you create a field name, you'll notice the drop down underneath which says please select the data type, and the various data types which are open to you. In clicking the drop down list box, a field can be defined as either text, integer, numeric, binary, Boolean, etc. Or it could be a date field or maybe date and time, etc. For me, I'm just going to leave it as text. And in selecting text, I can determine the text length. Well, in which case I'm now, by default, it's selected variable length, which means that my data can be anywhere from 1 to 50 characters in length. Good. So I've defined that first field. So if I should open the node, there's the field. I'm going to add a second field. So I right-click my new customer table, and I will now add another custom field, which I would probably call name. Good. I'm also calling it a text field, also 50. So I click OK. And I'll just add a third. If I now say, okay, add a custom field, and my custom field, I'll call it address. Good. So I now have a custom table called Otis table, which has 3 fields, but you'll notice again, it is in red. So because it is in red, right, it means that it must be compiled. So if I right click and I select deploy and execute, good. Again, let's give it a second to go through. It's creating the table, the structure of the table, creating the fields, and doing the necessary for deploying and execute. So here it is, complete. So now that I've had this custom table, it now means that I can create or add custom data to this custom table, because this table might not or does not exist in my production environment, in my underlying database. But for my project, I need to bring in customized data as well, so that I can integrate this data with my production data. And how would I do that? Well, by right-clicking my custom table, again, looking at my context-sensitive help menu, I go to advanced. And under advanced, good, there are some important things that we see here. You'll see one of the menu items where it says custom data. So I left-click custom data, and here I see now my grid, which allows me to populate my data. It's interesting to note, however, that whilst you are able to enter the data, so maybe 001, let me enter some data, John Doe, and address, sent, oops, Lucia, good, etc. You, however, have the ability to import your data. Good. You can actually import your Excel or maybe text data, and your data that is imported will automatically be populated within your custom data. So let's add just another just a second record. Mary Jean, and that probably right. Barbados. Barbados. How do you spell Bard? Right. So here I am now able to create custom data, and the custom data now becomes available to my project. But again, because I modified the data, I will now see that the table is in red. So I would have to go and again do my deploy and execute to make that data available to my project. Good. So let's just quickly give it a second. Good. and that process is complete. So if I should right click the table and now go to preview table, there's my data. Good. So I now have data which I'm now able to incorporate. So it's best I do it this way. My staging database under the business unit, my staging database, I want you to follow me as I'm saying this. My staging database contains all the data that I need, good, to build my cubes and build my dimensions. And the staging database will consist of tables that are date related. My staging database will consist of tables which are custom tables with customized data. And my staging database will consist of tables with the underlying database or from the data source that I connected to. So therefore, with you being able to connect to all your various data sources represented by the black and white grid icons, as well as to incorporate customized data that is not in any of your underlying data sources represented by the purple icons, as well as time or temporal, time-based data represented by the yellow icon. You now have the foundation for the building blocks of your business intelligence projects. Good. So this is crucial. Good. So when next we meet, because it's now 3 minutes to, we'll be going a bit further into some of the more features of the business units. We'll be looking at things like how to create conditional lookup fields, for example, how to use information in one table and look up information into another table and write it into a customized database. And then from the staging database, we'll now move to the next level, which is the JET data warehouse. And it is a data warehouse which now forms the building blocks for the creating of your cubes, right? So I hope that you enjoyed today's session. Again, as we said, as we're building and moving to the cubes so that you can now conduct your analysis, good, we first have to get a good understanding of how or by what mechanism do you connect to these various external databases using the JET Data Manager. And then after importing this data gets written to the JET staging database, which is what we showed today. And it is at the staging database level, you are able to incorporate not only the underlying database with its tables, but also customized tables that you would have built, and also customized date tables, because over 90% of your analysis that is done through business intelligence tend to be time-based in some time frame or another, whether if it's year, quarterly, etc. All right. I don't know about you, but I had fun today. I must say, again, thanks to all those who have attended. As again, I'm seeing quite a few people here that I know. Otis, Normande, Naphtali. Really appreciate you guys spending your time with us. As for everyone who has spent their time with us, because I know your times are precious. So I hope you enjoyed today's session, and looking forward to our next session as we'll go further into the JET analytics. Again, if you have any questions or any comments, or if you'd like anything clarified, please feel free to reach out to Gabriel or Macarena, Sandra or Mario. They'd be more than willing to assist you and point you to the right resource that can provide the answers for you. So until then, I just want to say thanks for coming, and I appreciate it, and have a nice day. So Gabriel, over to you.